Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called The Terrans Sleeping Giant, written by the-ahh-guy. The Terrans Sleeping Giant. Terran. That name conjures up a lot. The Terrans are the premier trading power of the galaxy. If you want something from somewhere, the Terrans will get it to you. And their ideal X-class super freighters are something to behold. Able to hold more than 1 billion tons of raw materials and luxury with a crew entirely of Terrans. You were guaranteed that nothing would interfere with your goods. Their position, 25,000 light years from the galactic core, meant that they were isolated from the disputes of the galactic conglomerate. They were also far enough that any species looking to fight would find them too far away to be worth the effort, but not too far enough that it would take 6 months for their ships to reach their destination. Instead, it takes just under a Terran month to get to that home of the galactic conglomerate, Ployus. The Terrans said they were pacifists and would not interfere with galactic politics. This principle was tested when the Tight-Ump War started, and the Terrans tended to both sides, giving them food and dihydrogen monoxide. They told the Galactic Consul this was to ensure survival of civilians caught in the war. So we had researchers investigate the Terran military doctrine and found a rich history that ended abruptly 100 years before first contact with a war they called the War to End History. We discovered they found something within themselves during that war they swore to destroy. After the war, they forged a document that the new Terran government must follow when it came to war. And on top of that list was the protection of civilian lives in times of battle. This word was foreign to most in the galaxy, as once a country was begun a war, every member of that species is involved in the war. And for the Terrans to say that you cannot poison the water factory workers' drink so that they can slow down the production of shells or kill younglings to deprive the species of future fighting generations was a concept genuinely foreign to most species. However, we let them be as to why stop them for practicing their pacifist ideology. When the Terrans saw the bombing of Uma by the Tight forces, they suddenly stopped all ships transporting goods to Tight territories, and even turned around those already in transit. This act shook the Tight government, who immediately asked why the Terrans had stopped transporting vital aid. The Terrans stated that they could not be complicit in the killing of civilians. The Tight were outraged and confused by this, seeing the action as tantamount to a declaration of war. However, the Terrans were too far away for anyone to conceive of mustering an army to challenge them. So, the galaxy watched as the Tight civilization collapsed into a brutal civil war, letting it happen without lifting a finger to help. The Terrans, however, could not let the suffering endure even though they had partly caused it. Unfortunately, the Tight public had the same opinion as the Tight government, and the Terrans' peace forces were pushed back by angry mobs of civilians. The Terrans realized after this that the rest of the galaxy does not think like them, and, in fact, thinks they're borderline crazy for trying to protect civilians. So they accepted this fact and continued to trade with the core, but would no longer partake in supplying governments during times of war. However, what the Terrans did not see was that the enemies were beginning to see them as weak-minded and, with their vast resources, they were easy pickings for anyone within range. Within range was the crucial part, as it took weeks for almost any fleet to travel across the needed space to get to the border of Terran Federation, and even more time to get to Terra itself. So only 2 empires could do it, the the-ahh-guy Empire and the Dietrich Empire. My people, the Dietrich, were neutral to the Terrans and, being militaristic, fancied the Terrans' chances in battle, knowing the history, as you put it. You never unlearn the art of war. The the-ahh-guy were much more opposed to the Terrans, and the 2 species had multiple close calls, mainly when super freighters were shot at for accidentally trespassing into the-ahh-guy space. It started getting nasty for the the-ahh-guy when one of their stars went supernova and destroyed a significant part of their breadbasket. This started a famine across large areas of the-ahh-guy space, and looking for food to feed their people, the Favja began to sponsor attacks on super freighters near their border to collect food and meals for the hungry. Most were peaceful hijackings that stole the super freighters and ran into Favja territory, leaving the crew stranded or handing them over at a later date. Of course, the Favja leadership denied that they were sponsoring the pirates and that the pirates were looking out for those they loved. The Terrans were suspicious of these attacks and started to arm their super freighters lightly to defend off attackers and keep the cargo safe. This arming of cargo created a proxy war between the Terrans and the Favja, with only one side knowing it was a proxy war and the others trying to protect its money from criminals. Then the Favja did something to piss the Terrans off royally. They massacred a crew. Overnight, the Favja were no longer harboring pirates, but terrorists, so the Terrans demanded an immediate surrender of those responsible for the attack and the commander of the pirate organization to be extradited to Terra to stand trial, to which the Favja acted dumb. They said that they did not know what the Terrans were talking about and that the pirates were not a cohesive group, instead random bands of criminals. The Terrans, displeased, told Favja royals that if they could not hand over those responsible for the deaths of 578 Terran crew in a month's time, then war would be declared. The Favja queen scoffed in the Terrans' face and agreed to the terms. You see, the Favja could not just hand over those responsible for the attacks, because they were all high-level commanders in the Favja military, who were given orders not to kill the Terran crew members. But kinship and blood is stronger than all, so Favja had to protect them and face war with the Terran as a consequence. Compared to the Terrans, the Favja fleets were up and running quickly because of the recent conflict the Favja had been involved with, with the first war fleets being sent out only 6 months after the war began. These fleets knew that the planets and solar systems closest to the border would be more heavily armored, so the fleets took a longer route, hoping the Terran scanners would miss them. So, when they reached the system of Thales, the Favja caught the system entirely off guard, and with a few defenses, the system was crushed and captured, but not wholly destroyed. This attack was a statement to the Terrans. We can come at you anywhere, and we will beat you. Unfortunately, this backfired on the Favja, as the attack only seemed to add more fuel to the fire of Terran's rage and boosted Terran willingness to fight. After the attack, a section of the speech by the Terran diplomat after the Terrans first united after the war to end history was published in news organizations across the galaxy as a statement by the Terrans leadership on the declaration of war. May we hope that the giant of war may never wake, that after a millennia it spent chasing us, it has grown tired. May it only grumble and snore in its long sleep. We must strive to keep it within its slumber, for one day it might once again walk this earth to spite us all. At first, most races were confused about what the original speaker was implying. The original speech was layered with metaphors that made it hard to decipher. Some people thought that it was about the literal giant walking the planet. Some thought the address was about the Terrans' ability to make war. I proposed to my advisors that the speech might be talking about the Terrans simply waging war and the curse it places on them. My theory caught on as claims of massive fleets moving within Terran space emerged. The intel was brushed off as the ship was only found to be super freighters moving mass amounts of steel and potassium nitrate. The Favja continued to make attacks with more resistance than the last. With the growing losses suffered by the attack fleet, the Favja commander decided to move to a more strategic position and claim victory. They boasted in front of the Galactic Council about how they had beaten the Terrans easily and how little fight the Terrans had put up. After the speech, all eyes in the Galactic Council turned to the lowly Terran ambassador, who was smirking, enjoying the show. Standing up, the ambassador began to use the same metaphor as a speech presented by the Galactic Standard months earlier. No, the giant cannot simply wake up and start fighting. They need to get ready before such a clash. They need to cook breakfast, get their gear on, and grab their weapon, and it is then, and only then, the giant's fight truly begins. So no, the war is not over until we say it is. We don't accept the Favja's terms of surrender, she said sternly. The Favja ambassador laughed, as if the Terran had just told the greatest joke in the world. The Dietrich ambassador seem to have had overconfidence in you because you seem to have forgotten how it all works. Or do I need to explain it to you like you're my young? You've lost ground. We have killed millions of your men. You're losing. Accept it, Terran. The Favja spat. The Terran, not amused, stood up sternly and began to speak with death in her bright blue eyes. A forge does not simply a light to a point where it can be fit to melt metal. No, it needs to be heated to an intense temperature so that it can melt into a liquid. Sometimes you may place the iron too early and it does not melt quickly. Instead, it becomes soft and red. You and your race are the Iron Ambassador, and sooner or later, you'll start to melt, before walking out to silence. Little did we know then, but things were moving within Terran space. Old designs and concepts getting built in long dormant factories, creating the essentials for trade surrounding great gas giants. Millions of Terrans were signing up to prepare for the Great Fleet. Scientists concocted great weapons that could burn away a planet's atmosphere and destroy stars. Finally, an armada that spanned solar systems was waiting at the Terran's borders, like it was all about to fall. All this is kept secret and silent for the day that it is activated. That day was January 25th on the Terran calendar. Sensors across the core picked up a significant movement within space heading towards the Favja Empire. Closer sensors told the core that the campaign was so massive that space itself was moving because of the sheer number of ships going faster than light. All of it converging on Favja space. 2 weeks was typically enough to get some defenses up. But for armies of the Terran size, there was only one option. Pray to your God for mercy and accept your coming death. Foolishly, the Favja put up defenses on their border, hoping that they could stand long enough to gather intel on what the Terran ships were and what the Terran weapons looked like. But they would not even do that. Most outposts lasted just 15 galactic standard minutes between first contact with the Terrans and ceasing all communications. The pictures they sent back haunted the Favja leadership. The images showed a great mass of grey getting closer and closer before the feed was cut. The first solar system hit was the Guard-Ret system. It stood longer than the defensive outposts, but only by a little. 37 minutes lasted before all signs cut except for the deepest military bunkers. They survived the longest of the lot at 1 galactic standard day before the Terran military kicked down the door, cut the final communications from the system, and lifted a flag on their conquest. In the time, they had taken down 3 other systems, and Favja were increasingly getting worried because the Terran battering ram was aiming straight for Georgia Prime, the Favja home system. The only good thing from the losses of systems after system was that the Favja were getting more information about the Terran attack. The main front was what the Favja nicknamed the Planet Killer. This charge of the front that would destroy everything in its path and lay the way for the capturing front to do its work. The capturing front cleared the planets taken by the Planet Killers and ensured the main front was well supplied with goods and ammunition. The big surprise for the Favja leadership was that the Terrans used projectile weapons that can only be countered with thicker armor instead of lasers, which a good enough shield would block. The Favja panicked to thicken their armor on their weapons and move every military asset they could to the Georgia Prime system to try and hold out in one last stand. But to the Favja's surprise, when the Terrans finally arrived at Georgia Prime, they moved around it like a wave and plowed through the neighboring systems. Thus, the real panic began as those in leadership realized that the Terrans were moving to perform an encirclement of Georgia Prime's system. Every being in the system scrambled to make either a speedy exit or bunkered down in readiness for a fight. Weeks passed, and the Terrans stayed outside the Georgia Prime system, guns ready, watching the panic inside. Finally, the Terran ambassador called a sudden emergency meeting of the galactic conglomerate, and every species in the galaxy knew what it was for. As you all know, the Terran Republic has been at war with the Favja Empire. We want to hold on to our promises and offer peace, but only if the Favja surrender unconditionally to the Terran forces. If our demands for peace are not met, we will destroy the entire Georgia system. home to 58 billion Favjari, plus the Giorgio stars going supernova once we're finished wiping out the monarchy off the galaxy. The death toll could exceed 100 billion, and the plunged what's left of the Favjar Empire into turmoil as we ransack the corpse. So, does the Favjar ambassador accept his surrender? The Terran spoke as she commanded the whole room, her face cold and calculated. All eyes turned to where the Favjar ambassador was meant to be sitting. He was only an interim.
What happened to your ambassador?
The High Speaker said, confused. He shot himself when we received the order for an emergency meeting, saying how this was the Terran backing us into a corner. The interim started out.
Dear me, well, intern, you are now the ambassador to your people, and thus you have to make the choice to accept or decline the Terran species offer.
The High Speaker said, saddened at the news that he was hearing. At this, the intern said, okay, before collapsing unconscious. It was soon after the intern collapsed and was carried out of the hall that the Favjar direct line to their monarchy started to ring as the Favjar Queen was calling to accept the terms of the deal in place of her ambassador. I watched as the Terrans accepted the deal. They were calm. They knew the outcome of the war from the moment it began. The Favjar had awakened the Terran giant. The galaxy had been shown the might of the Terrans held back, and their willingness to use it once provoked. I sat as the Terrans exited the conglomerate halls to stunned silence. I was the first ambassador to speak once all the Terrans had left. The Favjar have placed a curse on us all. The Terrans have revealed their hand. We all walk carefully around the Terrans now, and they will know. They will know our fear of them, of their might. I believe it is best interest of the conglomerate to act as if nothing happened. We cannot let the Terrans know our fear or weakness. We must treat them as always have, and trading partners in sophisticated web of galactic empires and species. The Terrans were true to their word. The great fleet surrounding Giorgio Prime retreated to the human territories, and the Favjar monarchy continued to rule. But as they left the systems they had burned and ruined, they left only one message in their wake. May we hope the giant of war may never awake, for we all saw the giant's might and its power. May it only crumble and snore in its long sleep, for we must all strive to keep it asleep. So one day it might once again walk this earth despite us all. We must learn from our mistakes so the giant can rest again, so that it may not haunt us with its presence in our minds. End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Dragon Soup, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Red Panda 121, Leslie 517, Bushmaster 177, Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Sans the Skeleton, Lightjock, Dragzoon WRE, and Lord Azrakal. Thank you very much.